When Life Was Born, official video, a real-life story. When Life was born, Natalia and Santiago had been together for 3 years. They lived in a small apartment in Medellin, filled with plants, books, scattered mugs, and the constant promise of a better future. Both worked, she at a design company, he at a logistics agency. Their relationship was loving, respectful, mature, until one day life changed without asking permission. Natalia began to feel strange, headaches, fatigue, dizziness. She blamed it on stress, but something was growing in her intuition. On impulse, without telling Santiago, she bought a pregnancy test. She held it in the bathroom as if holding a secret of the universe. The result appeared quickly, without mercy. Positive. She stood staring out the window, feeling the world shrink and expand at the same time. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh. She thought of Santiago, of his flights, his work, his dreams, and she felt fear. Then she thought of the future, of a new life, and she felt love, a love different from anything she had ever known. That night, when Santiago arrived, she took his hands. "I'm pregnant," she said softly. Santiago froze. His breathing changed. His gaze dimmed at first, then filled with confusion. "What do you mean?" he murmured. She expected everything, a smile, tears, an embrace. But what she received was silence. Over the following weeks, Natalia began to process it all. She went to the doctor, took vitamins, spoke to the baby even before she could feel it. She imagined rooms, walked through baby stores, though she bought nothing. And Santiago sank. He didn't say it, but he was terrified. He felt he wasn't ready, that he didn't have enough money, that he didn't know how to be a father. As Epictetus once said, it's not what happens to us that affects us, but what we tell ourselves about what happens. And Santiago wasn't listening to that voice. He only listened to fear. That broke something between them. They argued about everything: money, work, time, the future, diapers, nothing. Natalia began sleeping alone some nights. Santiago started going out more after work, saying he needed to clear his mind. She cried in silence, stroking her belly, feeling alone even while accompanied. The day she felt the baby move for the first time, Natalia called Santiago excitedly. He didn't answer. She kept going, but in her heart she felt a new crack, deeper than the last. One Sunday afternoon, when the distance between them hurt more than the fear, Natalia looked at him and said, "Santiago, do you want to be here?" Her voice trembled. "I don't know," he replied. Those words pierced her like a bullet. They didn't separate, but the relationship remained suspended. Tense, fragile, like a rope held by a single strand of hair. At 7 months pregnant, Natalia had a scare. A sharp pain forced her to go to the hospital. Santiago arrived running, pale, disheveled, eyes full of tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm scared." "Me too," she replied. That night, as the doctor reassured them, something changed between them. For the first time, Santiago placed his hand on Natalia's belly and felt the baby from within. He truly felt him. That's how the bond was born, not in a single blow, but like a sunrise. Ismael came into the world on a rainy day, crying loudly, eyes closed yet full of life. Natalia cried with emotion. Santiago cried with fear. Both trembled as they held him. Being parents was not easy. They didn't sleep, didn't eat well, had no time, no energy, and still no certainty. Santiago filled again with doubt. He felt life had pushed him, not that he had chosen it. He grew angry at himself, at Natalia, at the world. One early morning, after an argument, he left the house and walked under the rain for hours. He was exhausted inside. Sitting in an empty park, staring at the city lights, he remembered a phrase Natalia had placed on the refrigerator: "Freedom is the power to accept things as they are." For the first time, he stopped fighting the inevitable. He understood that Ismael was not a mistake, but an opportunity to become a better man. That fear should not govern him. That his duty was to love. Still not understanding everything, he returned home soaked, lay beside her, embraced her while she slept, and cried in silence. After that day, he began to change. Not immediately, not magically, but with effort. He began working more, not out of obligation, but purpose. He learned to care for the baby. He read parenting books, spoke with friends, went to therapy. Natalia saw every step, first with distrust, then with hope, finally with love. When Ismael turned 1, the couple was no longer the same. They had rebuilt their relationship from the ground up, from tenderness, from Stoic realism. Santiago left his old job and started a small digital venture. Natalia decided to resign from hers and support him. The first months were hard, losses, debts, failures, but they did not give up. They remembered something they repeated together. Do not demand that events happen as you wish. Wish that they happen as they do happen, and your life will be serene. Epictetus. They didn't fight reality, they used it. 5 years later, their project grew exponentially. They opened offices, hired staff, traveled, celebrated. They became references in their sector. They were successful. They were happy. They were a team. And most beautiful of all, Ismael grew surrounded by love, curiosity, and freedom. One day, at 8 years old, he asked for skates, and his life changed. He trained every day, rain or shine. He fell, cried, got up again. Natalia and Santiago supported him without pressure, without expectations, only support. And the boy, as if carrying the fire of heaven in his feet, became a prodigy. At 14 he was national champion. At 18, international champion. At 22, a legend. Ismael used to say sport was simple. If you fall, you get up. If you fail, you learn. And if you doubt, you move forward anyway. He had learned it from his parents. Today, with Ismael already an adult, the family is an example of love, discipline, and resilience. Their story became an inspiration for thousands. Natalia and Santiago teach Stoic philosophy at conferences. They have written books together, built a solid company, and a home filled with peace. But here comes the important part. Not everything has been perfect. Even today there are challenges. There are tests, long nights, fears. Life, as Epictetus said, is not what happens, but what we do with what happens. And though there was still more road to travel, more decisions, more struggles, more victories, Ismael stood at the top of the world, or at least that's how the whole country saw him. International champion. Young, strong, famous, disciplined, inspiring. His parents watched him with pride every time he stepped onto the podium. But as often happens, glory does not eliminate problems. It only hides them behind brighter lights. At 24, Ismael began to feel something strange. He woke up tired, even after sleeping 10 hours. His hands trembled before competing. Sometimes he lost his breath when he heard the crowd shout his name. He became irritable, silent, distant. But he kept training as if nothing were happening. No one could know. He was a champion. Champions cannot fail. One day, after a competition in Bogota, the press surrounded him. Ismael tried to smile, but the air thickened. His heart pounded against his ribs. He felt he was drowning. He ran to the bathroom and locked himself in. It wasn't physical. He was having an anxiety attack. Santiago and Natalia found him 20 minutes later, head in his hands, breathing as if he had just escaped a fire. "I'm fine," he lied. "Just tired." Santiago looked at him and in that instant understood something terrible. Ismael resembled too much the broken version he himself had once been. Weeks passed. Then months. The problem grew. Ismail began avoiding interviews, then practices. Later he stopped answering messages. The coach spoke to Natalia. "I don't know what's happening. He needs help." That afternoon, when he arrived home, Santiago found Ismail sitting in the dark of his room, staring at the wall as if something were written there. "What's wrong, son?" he asked. Ismail took time to respond. When he spoke, his voice was broken. "Dad, I don't know who I am without the medals." Those words struck Santiago like lightning. He remembered his own fears, his crises, his long nights. He felt his son collapsing inside. The following days were tense. Ismail refused to talk. Natalia cried hidden in the bathroom. One Friday, during a private training session, Ismail physically collapsed. His body said enough. They went to the doctor. The diagnosis was harsh: extreme exhaustion, accumulated stress, anxiety disorder. The doctor recommended mandatory rest and urgent therapy. When the news reached the press, social media exploded. Some supported him. Others mocked him. Others said he was finished. Ismail withdrew even more. One night, Santiago sat beside him on the balcony. He didn't try to give advice, speeches, or solutions. He simply spoke calmly. "Son, do you know what Epictetus said?" Ismail did not answer. Santiago continued. He said, "We are not our success nor our failure. We are what we decide to do with both." Ismail listened in silence. He said nothing, but something in his gaze shone. A spark, small, but alive. That night was a turning point. He began therapy. Slowly, very slowly, he began to understand something profound. For years he had based his worth on what he achieved, not on who he was. And that was destroying him. Training stopped. Trips were cancelled. Medals were stored in boxes. The house became a silent refuge, a place of recovery. But silence also brought shadows. One day, a letter arrived from the International Skating Committee. They wanted Ismail to compete in the World Championship. It was his opportunity to make definitive history. All of Colombia talked about it. Would he return? Would he quit? The questions were knives. Ismail began feeling guilty for not training. He was trapped between two worlds, the champion everyone wanted and the real person who still didn't know how to stand on his own. The arguments returned. Natalia feared he would lose his mental health. Santiago feared he would lose his dream. The tension grew so much that one day Ismail shouted, "Let me decide, I'm not a trophy." Natalia cried. Santiago stood frozen. Ismail left the house and walked for hours under the sun without direction. He ended up sitting in front of the track where he had trained since childhood. He looked at it like an old enemy. A young coach approached and greeted him respectfully. "I don't know if I'll come back," Ismail said. "Don't come back to win," the coach replied. "Come back to live." The phrase pierced his chest. Ismail decided to return to training, but not as before. Without pressure. Without obsession. Without perfection. When he returned home after the first practice, he saw something unexpected. Natalia and Santiago were waiting outside, holding hands, not as coaches, not as parents of a champion, just as parents. They embraced him without saying anything more. Epictetus wrote, "True freedom is internal." Ismail was beginning to find it. But the story does not end here. The World Championship would come. The most important competition of his life would come. Decisions, risks, pressure, glory, or defeat. Ismail was 8 years old when one ordinary morning everything changed. He left for school in his blue uniform, shoelaces poorly tied, a notebook full of drawings of fast skaters. Santiago watched him cross the door and felt an intense mixture of pride, fear, and love. He didn't fully understand why, but the boy he had once struggled to love freely was now the center of his universe. That same day, an unexpected call arrived. The sports company Natalia and Santiago had built together had just received a proposal to expand nationwide. It was their oldest shared dream, the chance to open their project to the world. Natalia cried with joy while holding the phone. Santiago remained silent. An old shadow lived inside him, the fear of not being enough. That night the air was cold. Santiago stepped onto the balcony and, looking at the city, said with a trembling voice, "I don't know if I'm made for this. To be a good father, a good husband, a good businessman. I'm still afraid of failing." Natalia approached slowly and held his face in her hands. "You don't have to be perfect," she whispered. "You just have to be present. You just have to love. Look at everything we've built together." Santiago closed his eyes and, for the first time in a long while, cried without hiding. It was the last night fear spoke louder than he did. The years passed, not without effort. Ismael grew surrounded by sports, friendships, and a discipline that seemed innate. At 15, he entered his first national skating competition. The stadium was full. Lights vibrated. The stands trembled with excitement. Natalia and Santiago held hands so tightly they seemed like one person. Ismael was nervous, though his face did not show it. Before stepping onto the track, Santiago knelt before him and held his shoulders. "Son," he said, "remember you only control your effort, not the result. Enjoy the journey." Ismael smiled and nodded. When they called him, he breathed deeply and began gliding across the track. He skated with clean strength, perfect rhythm, a beauty that surprised even those who knew nothing about sport. His movements seemed to draw a story upon the shining floor. The shot marked the final lap. Ismael accelerated, flew, crossed the finish line in first place. The stadium exploded. Shouts, applause, tears. Natalia jumped with joy. Santiago covered his face, trembling. Ismael raised his arms to the sky and cried. When he stepped down from the podium with the medal hanging from his neck, he embraced his parents tightly. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for teaching me to be strong here." He touched his mind before and then placed his hand on his chest. Santiago smiled, eyes red. "Thank you for teaching us the same." After the ceremony, they walked together toward the parking lot. The sky was painted orange and violet. As they moved forward, Ismael looked up and pointed toward the horizon. "Do you see that?" he asked. Natalia looked confused. "What do you see?" "Everything we are," he replied, "was born from the day we believed everything was lost. If that day hadn't hurt so much, we wouldn't be here today." The three of them embraced without another word. It was a long, warm embrace, capable of summarizing everything: fear, love, hope, the fall, and the victory. Years later, Ismael would become world champion. Natalia would become a well-known writer teaching Stoicism to mothers across the country. Santiago would help young fathers overcome fear. But the most important thing was not success. It was the inner stillness they learned to cultivate. That sense of freedom born when a human being understands that they do not control what happens, only the way they choose to live it. Ismael would grow up knowing that what is loved is cared for. Natalia would live knowing that what is difficult makes us stronger. Santiago would one day depart knowing fear never ruled him again, and that love, as always, ultimately
¿Te interesa el estoicismo, el crecimiento personal y las historias de vida? Entonces suscríbete y activa la campanita para no perderte ningún video. Y no olvides seguirnos en todas nuestras redes sociales para estar conectado con nuestra comunidad. Únete a la familia de historias estoicas.